the climate as well. So, talking about porpoising, I'm going to move on to a team that most our listeners support. Most Lewis Hamilton fans obviously support as well. It's Mercedes. They've had a bit of a slow start this year, considering they're the constructors champions and so on. And we've heard a lot of talks about sandbagging in testing. Oh, they're just going to get rid of those sandbags immediately and they'll be okay. They had the no side pods. They've had a lot of innovation going on. But whenever we turned on the races or turned on practice sessions, we could see Lewis and Russell bouncing down the straight violently, like they're going to get concussion. So I kind of wanted to put this segment into kind of, can we calm some Mercedes fans down? It's not the end of the world, is it? What are the reasons? What are the reasons that Mercedes are going through what they're going through?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting situation. The first thing you mentioned about the sandbagging is funny because Lewis specifically and Mercedes more broadly has done such a psychological, mind job on their enemies that they never really trust them if they actually appear to have problems. They're like, they're still going to come, and they're right to fear them because this is one of the most adaptable teams on the grid. I think that the positive thing that you can take from Mercedes right now with respect to the issues that they're going through, they're not in a situation where they've chosen a radical concept, they've maximized the performance of that concept, and then looked at the timing sheets and found themselves 7/10 back. That's not quite what's happened. What's happened is they have a concept that has a lot of potential lap time on the table based on everything that's telling them, their engineers. Has a lot of performance on the table, but if they try to run the car as it is at the ride height that they want to run it at, they have this critical problem of the porpoising so bad that they just can't run the car there. So what do you do to fix porpoising? Ideally, you'd want to fix it without losing any performance at all. And that requires a floor upgrade or maybe something on the suspension to stop the bouncing. But if you can't do that, the way to fix it is to raise the ride height. Raising the ride height prevents it from getting low enough to actually kick off that bouncing in the first place. The problem is, raising the ride height reduces your downforce and it increases your drag, right? So you don't have the downforce that you need in order to go through the twisty bits, and you also have more drag than you're supposed to have. So it's a double penalty. And so I described the performance on the table for the W13 as low-hanging fruit. But with this porpoising problem, it's like low-hanging fruit in someone else's backyard, right? Like you have to jump a fence to get over there. But once you get to it, the performance is there to be had. And this is certainly not a McLaren and Ferrari 2009 situation where both were embroiled in this drivers' championship down to the last race and arguably took their eye off the ball for the regulation change for 2009 and just missed a trick with the double diffuser or whatever else. That's not quite where Mercedes is. Mercedes committed to the development of this car in the middle of last season. If anything, Mercedes has gone the other way. They've committed so far in the direction of this advanced concept that they've resulted in something that seems to have a really big performance differentiator associated with it, but it's not fully cooked. Is how I would describe it. And I think that's what the cost cap is actually doing, is the engineers are still brilliant. They're still finding solutions that they would find otherwise, but they have to get to the final result faster. And because Mercedes won the championship last year, they were in the worst position with regard to CFD geometries they could evaluate and wind tunnel time. So the truth of the matter is that regulation changes are always more dangerous to a dynasty than any rival team. The reality of the situation is, for Mercedes to continue their domination this year would actually be harder than ever before. However, if there's one team you cannot count out of a competition ever, it is Mercedes, because we can say all too often, how did the beginning of 2017 look and 2018 look? Ferrari looked very strong and Mercedes wasn't really as strong. And in the end, they fought back and won. Now, just to be clear, I'm not equating what's happening now to what happened in those 2 years, because in those 2 years, Mercedes was right behind them. They were right behind them even when Ferrari was winning. Now they're a bit further back and comfortably the third fastest team with the porpoising mitigation changes. But the thing is, we know why the car is slow. We know that if you're just able to run the car at the designed ride height, there will be performance there. You just have to get over this hurdle of the porpoising.
Well, I'll say from now, I think for Mercedes fans, they could take some solace that it's not loads of different problems. It's just one major issue with the porpoising, and it seems like there's no side pods actually works because you have extreme downforce, which a lot of teams are looking for. They're seeking for that. They're seeking that downforce. I'm a McLaren fan. We've got no downforce. I know that already.
No, we have a decent amount of downforce. I've seen the speed races. We actually have more downforce than plenty of other teams. I mean, if here's the way to think about this: if the Mercedes chassis and engine combination was bad, objectively bad, we should be behind McLaren and Aston Martin, but they're not. They're comfortably ahead. So clearly there's something there. There's the kernel of something great there. What I would say about the porpoising and getting it when you have a lot of downforce and maybe not getting it when you don't, that's actually not just like hypothesis. I mean, that's been more or less confirmed. If you remember, McLaren was like being celebrated during the winter test, and in the first race is like, hey, we don't have porpoising. Maybe it's because we have these beautiful vortex structures on the side of the floor. It's sealing it. We're a much more efficient car, and that's the reason why I don't see the porpoising. Come to find out, they believe they're 100 points down on downforce relative to Mercedes, right? So the car is not being pushed into the ground hard enough to be able to actually experience this porpoising issue. So there are several different ways to look at the problem. All of them indicate that Mercedes is faster than they're showing. It's not just blind optimism. It's data-based, it's evidence-based. And I think if you were to ask Charles Leclerc or Carlos Sainz or Verstappen or Perez, they would tell you they're fighting each other, for what they perceive to be the championship lead, but they have their eye in the mirror because they know eventually Mercedes will turn it around.
Definitely. I think one thing that I was thinking about is the cost cap. And how usually a team like Mercedes, and Mercedes has dominated and have shown excellence in the last couple of years, especially in the last 8 years, because they've won 8 constructors in a row. Can you simply just buy your way out of this by just trying to throw money at the problem of porpoising and get yourself out of it? Or because you have this limited amount of wind tunnel time, you have the limited CFD time, is it more of a long-term issue than an overnight fix?
It's actually even worse than that. So not only can you not throw infinite funds at this, but even if you could, the nature of the problem means you can't just solve it in the normal way of doing a CFD analysis or in the wind tunnel, because in order to get the car to porpoise an actual wind tunnel model, you have to run it in a condition that would probably damage the belts that the car is running on, not to mention the sting that comes from the ceiling that's actually holding the car in place. That could easily be damaged. And then as far as the CFD goes, most of the CFD that most teams are doing, it's unsteady analysis in terms of how the flow is solved, the aerodynamic flow is solved. But in terms of the car dynamically moving as a response to like a real-time calculation of what the suspension loads are and what the air load is and the pitch sensitivity, that's not what it is. It's give me a CAD model of the car. You tell me what the orientation is relative to the ground and how high off the ground it is. Assume a static flow, and it'll give you the drag and the downforce. That's not how you would find porpoising. That would help you find porpoising if you see some sort of weird sensitivity of like the center of pressure moving, forwards and backwards with respect to ride height. But even that is not jumping out at you saying you have a problem. So not only can they not spend infinite amount of money on this problem to solve it, but actually, even if they had infinite money, the tools they have would still require some modification to be able to predict and solve this particular issue. I think they've taken a very pragmatic approach. They've taken the first practice session of the first couple of races to try out some new hardware and just see at the end of the day, does this new floor work? Is it better or worse? And then using that to make their decisions going forward. I think it's a pretty good strategy, actually.
Definitely. Another thing that I kind of wanted to discuss is the catching up, the development kind of whenever there's a new regulation, development is quite fast, especially in the first half of the season. Is this going to catch out the teams that are on the back foot now? Because let's say, for example, with Mercedes, you're half a second behind your Red Bulls and your Ferraris, and you gain that half a second, but then Red Bull and Ferrari are developing and they gain another half a second, and you're just playing catch up for the rest of the season. Do you think it will go down that way, or is it something where Mercedes can actually close that gap and some more whilst Red Bull and Ferrari are developing?
I think it's actually the latter, believe it or not, because it's not, as I said before, the situation that Mercedes finds itself in isn't that they have a fully fledged concept and then are trying to sort of develop and work on how to make this concept even faster. They have a concept that they don't even know how fast it is yet. Like, they don't actually have data on what the true performance ceiling of this design is on the track. And if the numbers are to be believed, they actually could have like a big jump in lap time from where they are now. Now, of course, this is a moving target. You know, standing still in Formula One is going backwards. Ferrari and Red Bull are developing their cars. However, they're not going to find a second or second and a half in 4 races. However, there is a realistic possibility that Mercedes actually could do that, not because they've modified their concept to, you know, extract a whole 1.5 seconds or something crazy out of the car. It's because it's running with one hand behind its back right now. We don't actually know what fully fledged W13 looks like. It could be half a second. It could be 7/10. We don't know what it actually is. So it is true that being on the back foot is not great, but it's also true that the specific circumstances that Mercedes finds itself in could actually allow it to close the gap. And if that ends up coming to fruition and we find ourselves with a car that is genuinely the class of the field in the second half of the season or even before, retrospectively, you would look back and realize results like, you know, Bahrain are actually critical to the championship, because then what matters is how many points are you scoring on your worst day? If on your best day you're suddenly the class of the field and you're winning, what's ultimately going to decide the championship is how many points you lost when you weren't winning. And I think that, as I said before, results like Bahrain are going to become very important towards the end of the season for sure.
And it's not like previous seasons where we've had regulation change. We have a lot more races. The season's much more longer as well. So you can make that turnaround and have a potential charge at the title in the second half of the season, especially if you get consistent results. And I think results like Bahrain, getting a podium out of a weekend when the weekend started, you think you're not going to get anything out of this, especially a podium.
Yeah, I just want to really briefly say there's no law of nature that says Mercedes has to win. Okay, they have to earn the right to win, and I think if people pay attention, they would realize that they have been doing that for years. They have earned the right to win. It hasn't always been assumed. They've fought for everything that they have. They just really have to do it this time. And I think, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I think if we come to Abu Dhabi at the end of the year and Lewis Hamilton is in the fight for the championship, it could potentially win it, and somehow actually does win it after the start, I mean, he's the greatest ever. I mean, he's the greatest ever. There's no argument at that point. You're never going to convince me that someone is better when they started off with such a difficult season.
No, I definitely think that's like a special weapon. That's a trump card that Mercedes has, while the other teams don't have. You have Lewis Hamilton. So even if you're a couple tenths down or you're getting closer, he is that difference right there. So if he even is within an earshot of a title charge, he can do that. He can pull
man is greedy. He wants titles. He wants he wants it all. He wants them all.
Yeah. He's a very greedy man when it comes to Formula One. When he's looking for those wins, he's got 100 of them. He wants more.
Yeah,
100%. Just to talk about the teams that are seemingly in the title race at this moment in time, Red Bull and Ferrari. You mentioned this previously. Red Bull very, 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 very fast in the straights, and they look like they have a lot of downforce. A lot of people kind of counted them out for this season, considering them bringing developments nearly every race last season, and them having not a lot of CFD or wind tunnel time, and them developing this car. What do you think of their performance this season so far? Has it surprised you?
It has, honestly. I mean, I think everyone could be forgiven for assuming that they would absolutely start on the back foot, right? Think about what Mercedes did. They committed themselves to not developing the 2021 car precisely to produce a design for 2022 And we know for a fact that, as you said, Red Bull brought developments to every single race, at least up until Qatar, maybe even afterwards. They were clearly spending money on that car and clearly were developing it. And yet somehow they still ended up with a very competitive car, maybe even the best car. We don't know. We'll have to see how things play out. But they certainly didn't start the season on the back foot. And there's certainly a juxtaposition there that's very intriguing to me. It suggests that the introduction of a cost cap does not determine your future. Even if you have less CFD time and wind tunnel time than someone else, you can still potentially come up with something that's a winner. I'll give respect to Adrian Newey, his involvement with the RB18. It's clearly a good car. Whatever else is going on, we can talk about the title fight, but they certainly didn't build a bad car, and they're definitely in the hunt.
Yeah, I definitely think it kind of rewards innovation and rewards you being clever in these scenarios. So Adrian Newey has been around in the business for a very long time. I think he was even working on cars back in the ground effect era, I think.
He started actually in the States in IndyCar a long time ago before really started to design cars. But yeah, he definitely has experience with ground effect for sure.
Yeah, so that kind of giving him the advantage over maybe some other teams, kind of understanding, okay, these cars are completely different. I was quite surprised as well. I didn't expect, usually whenever there's a regulation change, whoever was up there, especially when it comes to drivers' titles and in a title battle, they kind of fall off. But for them, it looks like that engine is quite powerful as well. We call it the Red Bull powertrains. I'm still calling it Honda. It's still Honda.
It is a Honda.
It's
designed, manufactured, and serviced by Honda. I will not participate in this rebranding exercise currently that Red Bull is doing. It's a Honda.
I'll definitely still call it Honda from now on. But yeah, they've surprised quite a lot, and then I think they're going to be up there for the majority of this season. But a team that has the opposite scenario, Ferrari, they've been kind of so-called tanking the 2020 season. The 2021 season, they kind of nerfed it at the beginning, but they've been saying for a very, very long time, Matteo Bonotto saying, we're working towards 2022, we're working towards 2022. And it kind of looks like it's being realized now. What are your thoughts on the Ferrari this season and their car? Do you think it's one of the best?
Yeah, I do think it's one of the best. In fact, I think it's actually they're a more realistic chance for the title than Red Bull is currently. The reason why I say that is because, look at Saudi. It's an incredibly high-speed track. It rewards top speed more than other tracks would be. I mentioned to you that Ferrari has the highest, or Red Bull has the highest top speed. If Ferrari can take Red Bull to the line for victory within half a second at Jeddah, they're very strong. They're going to be strong at other tracks that rely more on downforce, no question. As far as Ferrari goes, yes, they were tanking in some previous years, but it wasn't really deliberate. It was actually because the 2019 season, the level of performance and power the engine was generating, and then suddenly a discontinuous change in how much power they had available to them. If you design your car around a high downforce configuration under the assumption that you're going to have the power to still get decent top speed, then your entire car is built around that concept, and suddenly you're cut back on the power because you're forced to comply with an FIA settlement off the books. Suddenly your car has way too much drag for the power that it has available to it, and suddenly you have to cut back on the wing level. You have to modify the balance, and the car is completely out of sorts. Even if the chassis is inherently good, it would only be good with a specific engine that you don't have, right? So that really ruined their 2020. 2021 was an evolution of those cars. They weren't allowed to design brand new car in 2021 because of the pandemic. They had this token system, to limit how much they could develop. So it's largely the same car, but the very important thing that Ferrari did without developing that car aerodynamically much at all, the most important thing they did was introduce their electrical system, the ERS system. They brought forward their 2022 ERS system into their 2021 car, starting in like Russia or USA. I don't remember which race it was. That was like very, very powerful. If you look at the point score between McLaren and Ferrari, they're neck and neck throughout the entire season. And that ERS upgrade comes from Ferrari, and suddenly it's diverging lines. And so we know that their hybrid system is extremely strong. We also assume that they handled the E10 combustion questions very well for Ferrari. So they have a strong internal combustion engine. They have a provably strong hybrid system. And because they introduced it half a season early, they're going to have an entire year of running that system and understanding it. And they can still introduce a brand new ERS upgrade before that part of the engine is frozen for this engine freeze, for the 4-year engine freeze. So not only do I think Ferrari is a real deal overall, and they've laid the mechanical groundwork to do that, their aero concept is really interesting. It's amazing to me how very intelligent, smart people don't understand something and assume that because they don't understand it, that the concept can't work, right? The ultimate decider of whether the concept is good is lap time. And even if people don't understand how Ferrari's concept works, it clearly is working. I'm talking about the aero, side pods and the wings and everything. So I'm very impressed with Ferrari. I think they still don't quite understand how much of a threat they represent. If Mercedes does find a way to get back in the title fight, I'm more worried about Ferrari than I am about Red Bull at this moment.
I definitely think this is why it's called Formula One. People have taken such different approaches to these regulations. We see with the side pods, Ferrari have a completely different approach to how Mercedes have done it and how Red Bull have done it. And you can kind of see there's so much different solutions to one problem. Mm-hmm. And that it's good to see that a lot of the engineers have taken different approaches to this issue of these.
Yeah, I completely agree. And sometimes it's not just about what's the performance today. It's about what's the performance going to be in 2 months. It's not just how fast is this current version that we have, but what's the development potential? That's just as important as anything else.
Yeah, I think as the season plays out longer, we're going to see, okay, who really got this right. Yeah. When we get to like race week 9, race week 10, and they're still performing at a high level, we're going to see, and we're going to see more development as well. Who's reached their development ceiling already, or who hasn't?
I don't think anyone really has, because I don't think. Yeah, there's 2 things that have to happen. Number one is the entire grid has to look at everything else that every other team did and figure out what's the best concept right now in the field. That's one step. That's like convergence at a given time step. Then on top of that, as you're marching through time, even the best concepts are improving. They're getting better. They're modifying their geometry in minor ways that results in lap time. Or you could have a revolutionary shift where someone just didn't have enough time to go over the regulations and find a new trick to exploit. But maybe halfway through the season, they're like, actually, we could do this. We could do this. So this is like 5/10. And if that happens, then you're really going to start seeing jumps in lap time and also the running order. So I don't actually think it's fair to say anyone's reached their true performance ceiling, because we already know even a team like Aston Martin, who you would traditionally think of as being on the back foot, we know that the model they're running in the wind tunnel now looks nothing like their car that's racing. And that's precisely because they're chasing new concepts. So it's going to be fun either